Hi, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green. We begin this hour with a live look at Capitol Hill, where any moment now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions will testify again before the House Judiciary Committee. Sessions is expected to face some pretty tough questions about his contacts with Russian officials during the 2016 campaign. And he'll likely be asked about some recently released court documents and testimony that show that he knew about meetings between Trump campaign aides and Russian interests. That newly released information contradicts previous testimony from the Attorney General. So for a preview, let us bring in Ed O'Keefe. He's a CBS News political contributor and a congressional reporter for the Washington Post, and also Zeke Miller standing by there. He is a CBSN political contributor as well and a White House reporter for the Associated Press. Hey, guys, thanks for joining us. Zeke, we're going to start with you. Let's talk about what we have learned so far since the last time Sessions has testified in front of a committee, and where you think the focus of these questions will be.
Well, obviously, the biggest development is the George Papadopoulos plea agreement, and then sort of all what came out of that, the revelations that of that meeting in Trump Tower with the Trump foreign policy team, and what they discussed, and sort of his what he sort of said he did in terms of saying that he was going to try to broker a meeting between the president and Vladimir Putin. And then in terms of what was Sessions' response to that, the Sessions people said he dismissed it out of hand. But all of those sorts of all of those details, though, sort of seem to contradict what Sessions told Congress back in January when he sort of came into the job. So that's sort of high on the list and sort of colored on that as well. We've seen the latest sort of details around Uranium One in terms of whether it be a special counsel. There are new revelations on multiple fronts that the Attorney General is really going to be confronted with when he testifies shortly.
Yeah, and Ed, there's also revelations from Carter Page as well. And of course, what Zeke mentioned about George Papadopoulos saying that he told then candidate Trump and Jeff Sessions that there's a possibility for a meeting, that he could broker it, something that Jeff Sessions never brought up before. So tell me, what do you think the nature of the questions will be like during this session?
They're going to ask all of those points. They're going to bring them up, certainly. And if recent history is any guide, Anne-Marie, Sessions will bat them away and say, look, I've recused myself from this. I can't get into it. Happy to have you ask me, but I really can't answer those questions. And he'll face questions about that. He's also going to face questions today, though, about reports that he's considering a second special counsel to investigate the Clinton Foundation and its ties to this Canadian firm that had sold mining rights to a Russian energy entity. This would actually be fulfilling the request of the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte of Virginia, and other Republicans who've been pushing for some kind of a special counsel to investigate essentially Clinton world and what it may or may not have been doing when she was Secretary of State. One other thing to consider here today as well, whether or not he would go home to Alabama to run for his old Senate seat. Remember, Roy Moore, the Republican Senate candidate, now facing allegations that he inappropriately touched or harassed or spent time with underage women, is running for Sessions' old Senate seat. And there's been talk here at the Capitol in the last few days that there might be some kind of an agreement where Sessions would agree to run as a write-in candidate and try to take back his old seat, hold it for the Republicans. We'll see if he gets asked today and whether he either denies that that's the case or that he rules it out and decides to stay on as Attorney General. But overall, his performance will be closely watched by the White House. Remember, he and the president are not in good standing right now, or at least that's what we've been led to believe. If he does well today, certainly the president will be happy about that. If for some reason he stumbles, he could be at risk.
Certainly, and then just to point out to everyone that Jeff Sessions has arrived and he's sat down at the table there. A lot of photographers taking pictures. Zeke, Ed mentioned that some of the things he's going to be meetings with the Russian ambassador, when he initially said he had never had contact with any Russian officials, and then he had to admit in front of these committees that he indeed had some contact with the Russian ambassador. I mean, you can do that once, maybe you can do that twice, but if he does it again, what are the repercussions?
I mean, it's certainly there are legal options for Congress to take. I mean, it is a crime to lie before Congress, but that's sort of very unlikely as a former senator. It just looks like a pattern of misbehavior or just sloppiness on the part of the Attorney General. This is the sort of thing that we've seen not just specifically dealing with Sessions. We've seen this across the Trump administration, though, sort of a sense of sloppiness regarding all things Russia, and sort of raises the broader question, why have they not been able to get their act together still now after more than a year of questions about ties between the Trump campaign and sort of the assistance they got from Russia. Just in the news today, Don Jr.'s communications with WikiLeaks and Vice President Mike Pence's sort of blanket denial of any of the Trump campaign being in cahoots with WikiLeaks back in October 2016, and now having to walk that back just overnight. So there is this pattern of sloppiness. And one thing that that Ed really pointed out is, I think that is worth highlighting again, is sort of just how on the outs the president is and his attorney general are. I mean, for the president, the original sin of all things Russia in a lot of ways is Sessions' recusal from any matters relating to the 2016 campaign, and that sort of, in the president's mind view, sort of created the circumstances for Bob Mueller to be named as a special counsel, and that created all sorts of headaches for the president to this day. So that's one of those things where even if Sessions does a very good job here, it's hard to erase sort of what he did 6 months ago in the president's view.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Zeke, Ed, the opening statements have begun here at the House Judiciary Committee, so we're going to dip into that. Just want to mention to you guys, you were twinning. I don't know if you've seen each other yet, but you're both wearing basically the exact same outfits and looking very good doing it.
Welcome to Washington. It's Pink Tie Tuesday, Anne-Marie.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
By you to do the right thing, I believe you, as a person of integrity, would have been impartial and fair in following the facts wherever they led. I have chosen, as chairman of this committee, to let Special Counsel Robert Mueller do his job, free from undue political influence. At the same time, however, this committee will do its duty and conduct oversight of the Department of Justice. To that end, we sent 2 letters to you, one in July and another in September, calling on you to name a second special counsel to restore the public's confidence in our justice system. Numerous matters connected to the 2016 election remain unresolved. To date, the department has not appointed a second special counsel. Consequently, this committee had no choice but to open our own joint investigation with the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee to review DOJ and FBI's handling of the investigation into former Secretary Hillary Clinton and her mishandling of classified information. As we said earlier this year, it is incumbent on this committee in oversight capacity to ensure that the agencies we oversee are above reproach and that the Justice Department, in particular, remains immune to accusations of politicization. Whoever is Attorney General, the Justice Department must even-handedly administer justice. You have recused yourself from matters stemming from the 2016 election, but there are significant concerns that the partisanship of the FBI and the department has weakened the ability of each to act objectively. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this and what steps you are taking to remove politics from law enforcement. However, these investigations are but a few of the many important issues we need to discuss today. For instance, we just overwhelmingly reported the USA Liberty Act out of committee last week. This bipartisan legislation would reauthorize Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The administration has chosen to oppose any reform of the law. I understand the desire for a clean reauthorization of this vital program. However, I believe this stance is a miscalculation that risks further eroding trust in our intelligence apparatus. We hope we can work with you now that the USA Liberty Act, which reauthorizes a law that is vital to our nation's battle against terrorism while protecting American civil liberties, has been reported out of the committee. This is especially important given the ongoing threat of terrorist attacks in the United States. As we all know, not 2 weeks ago, 8 people were killed and almost a dozen injured when an ISIS-inspired jihadist drove a rented pickup truck into a crowded bicycle path near the World Trade Center in New York. The terrorist threat is real and ongoing. We cannot afford to play politics with national security. I also look forward to continuing to work with you on efforts to reform our nation's criminal justice system. There is bipartisan support to do this in Congress, and with your help, we can make changes that crack down on violent offenders, while also doing more to rehabilitate federal prisons and curb abuses in the system, as well as excessive punishments. To your credit, since you assumed leadership of the Department of Justice, there has been a significant increase in the prosecution of firearms offenses in the United States. For years, I have criticized lax enforcement of the gun laws already on the books. Enforcing these laws is the most effective way to combat violent crime in our cities and neighborhoods. Under your leadership, the number of defendants charged with unlawful possession of a firearm has increased by nearly 25%. The number of defendants charged with armed drug trafficking has increased 10%. I commend you for your focus on these prosecutions because they will help make our streets safer. There are many other matters on which we share common ground, especially when it comes to rectifying the failures of the Obama administration. For example, earlier this year, the House passed legislation to ban settlement payments to non-victim third parties, following your policy directive to shut down the use of such mandatory donations. These reform initiatives followed a concerted effort by the Obama administration to use settlements to benefit its political allies. We commend your efforts to combat illegal immigration, protect our citizens from criminal aliens, and to fight back against so-called sanctuary cities. More than 2 years have passed since Kate Steinle was murdered by an illegal immigrant who had been deported 5 times. We have addressed this issue head-on by moving legislation to combat sanctuary cities and find and remove criminal gang members. Mr. Attorney General, our country is at a crossroads. Our constituents are gravely concerned that our justice system does not work for them. Under your leadership, the Justice Department has taken strides to mitigate the harms done in the prior administration. I implore you to work with us to continue that trend, and I thank you sincerely for your appearance here today. I now recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Top of the morning. In the ordinary course of business, any one of a dozen topics related to the Department of Justice would be worthy of its own hearing. And to be clear, I would rather spend our time today discussing the upkeep of the criminal justice system, the enforcement of civil rights, and the work we must all do to ensure access to the ballot box. Instead, we must spend our time debating the troubles of a wayward administration, how the Attorney General conducts himself before Congress, how President Trump undermines the integrity of the justice system, and how the department continues to ignore the oversight requests of this committee. Although this is the Attorney General's first appearance before the House, he's already made 3 visits to our colleagues in the Senate. At his confirmation hearing, he testified that he did not have communications with the Russians. Last month, he testified that a continuing exchange of information between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government did not happen, at least to my knowledge, and not with me. We now know, of course, that neither of these statements is true. Shortly after the Attorney General made the first comment, the Washington Post reported that he met with the Russian ambassador at least twice during the campaign. In the past month, we've also learned that the Attorney General must have been very much aware of a continuing exchange of information between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. In charging documents unsealed last month, George Papadopoulos, a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, admits to extensive communications with Russian contacts. At a March 31st, 2016 meeting of the campaign's National Security Advisory Committee, attended by candidate Trump and chaired by Senator Sessions, Mr. Papadopoulos stated in sum and substance that he had connections that could help arrange a meeting between